Charlotte Voss pulled that Aston Martin DB11 to its fifth luxury repair shop in 3 weeks. The corporate mechanics gave her the exact same textbook verdict as the 4 dealerships before them. Let us inspect the damage together. A dead transmission. The expert fix? $271,000. Pen in hand, she was seconds away from signing off on that ridiculous corporate work order. Then her assistant leaned over, whispering about a gritty, no-nonsense shop on the edge of town. Run by a quiet working-class dad nobody knew existed. No flashy showroom, no neon, just cheap motor oil and the raw sound of grinding metal. And a veteran mechanic named Isaac Hayes wiping thick grease onto a faded shop rag, looking like a man who never once cared about impressing the rich and powerful. Charlotte Voss built Voss Prestige Motors into the third-largest luxury dealership network before turning 34. And she did it all without ever offering an apology. She ran corporate meetings exactly like a surgeon, with cold, clinical precision. Ruthless economy, total brutal clarity. Knowing that every second of hesitation burned serious corporate cash. She never showed up late, and she never offered fake corporate smiles. She completely ignored soft emotions when hard data was right there. After years in cutthroat boardrooms, she knew letting feelings drive choices meant you would not last long at the top. Her luxury dealerships moved everything from high-end Bentleys to brand-new Lamborghinis. And Charlotte had personally authorized the expensive purchase of that dead Aston Martin DB11 sitting completely bricked on her lot. An $800,000 machine picked to celebrate 10 years of business with billionaire Elliot Graves. This luxury machine was much more than a simple gift. It was a classic power move, something she learned watching her wealthy father. Proving the Voss family name stood for absolute perfection on 4 luxury wheels. Because a 10-year alliance with a giant like Graves demanded a statement you could not make with a simple wire transfer. She track-tested 3 different DB11s before finally choosing the exact specs. The perfect custom paint, the hand-stitching, the bespoke dash panel. She felt supreme pride believing this exotic car was completely, undeniably flawless. But here is where we watch that perfection crumble. It broke, and Elliot Graves rarely asked for anything. He owned 18% of her entire luxury auto empire. He was her father's most trusted partner before the old man retired. And he never once raised his voice or sent a single angry email, because he simply never had to. His silent stares carried more weight than any other executive's screaming ever could. So when he called, confirming he would fly down next Friday to test drive that DB11, the very luxury machine Charlotte had proudly crowned as the ultimate symbol of their family legacy. You can almost feel the weight of that call sinking into her chest like a cold stone. Then the car completely died on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Graves was sitting right there in the passenger seat when that expensive transmission violently locked mid-gear. The engine spat an awful, grinding metallic crunch right into the cabin. And that prized luxury machine rolled to a humiliating stop near a busy intersection. Graves stayed completely silent. He patiently waited for the tow truck, took her backup car, and spoke only once before leaving. He simply mentioned he could not wait to see the DB11 fixed after his Boston trip. His voice was not even slightly angry. You and I are going to look at a mystery that started silently, and believe me, Charlotte hated silence way more than anger. She called her head technician right from the sidewalk, watching the flatbed haul her expensive ride away. Her instructions were brutally clear. This supercar had to be perfect in 7 days. She gave her guy a blank check to get it done. She never expected to be stuck on the curb, watching her gorgeous DB11 get loaded onto a cheap tow truck. Those 7 days quickly shrank to 3. Instead, she got 3 weeks of dead silence and 5 incredibly expensive dead ends. She was blindsided, in her wealthy world throwing piles of cash at a problem always bought a solution. The only real question was the cost. But this time, the repair bills soared while her broken Aston Martin just sat there, dead and silent. Naturally, her team called the big authorized Aston Martin dealership up north first. They were the only certified factory shop within 60 miles. Their highly paid corporate experts spent 2 full days poking around the DB11 before, handing over a verdict with the smug attitude of someone used to writing massive bills. The fancy torque converter was shot. Worse, the transmission computer suffered a chain reaction of electronic failures because of it. Their textbook solution: rebuild the whole transmission and reprogram all the software from scratch. The ridiculous cost: $180,000, plus 2 months of waiting for parts to ship from England. Charlotte wanted a second opinion before that crazy invoice could even print. She went to ZF next, the German outfit that actually manufactured the DB11 gearbox. They flew in a corporate tech guy who spent 3 days hooking up his computers. His fancy paperwork used different jargon, but he reached the exact same conclusion. The main clutch pack had overheated and fried under way too much pressure. The internal hydraulics were shot, so he claimed the entire transmission needed to be thrown out. His quote, $214,000 and another 10 weeks of waiting around. The third shop they tried was a boutique outfit called Exotic Transmission Specialists. Let's pause here. Her high-paid advisors swore by them, and she'd seen their shiny ads in private jet magazines. The owner supposedly had 40 years of experience working on high-end imports, even building race cars for 3 professional motorsport teams. He stared at the broken DB11 for one quick afternoon, then told Charlotte's team that this expensive gearbox was past saving. According to his textbook wisdom, the internal carnage was too bad to ever rebuild. The supercar simply needed a whole new factory unit shipped straight from Europe. $270,000. This expert wouldn't even guess on a timeline until she authorized the massive payment up front. A fourth opinion came from Prestige Auto Engineering, a massive commercial franchise chain that Charlotte would normally never even look at. She called them anyway, because the alternative was quitting, and giving up just was not an option for her. Their lead tech just looked at the computer data from the first 3 shops. He spent one quick afternoon with the car, then handed over a report matching the other guys. Another expert claiming this transmission was completely dead. Those experts had only one answer: swap the whole transmission. $265,000. Stick with me here. Opinion 5 was a German exotic car engineer with 20 years advising elite automakers. Now he worked as a private diagnostic advisor for ultra-wealthy collectors. Charlotte's assistant tracked down his name through a quiet Stuttgart connection. This so-called expert worked remotely, demanding 36 detailed photos of the gearbox. He replied with just one single page. His expert verdict: the Aston Martin transmission was completely and utterly dead. Naturally, a total replacement made perfect sense. He warned against wasting another dollar trying to repair the broken unit. Charlotte stood frozen inside her luxury corner office. Holding that 5th report, the total estimate hit $271,000. Her pristine luxury flagship, the absolute showcase of dealership perfection, was completely dead in the water. Just sitting there uselessly with only 8 days until her biggest VIP client landed. Her catered lunch sat completely untouched. 2 vital meetings were canceled. Her assistant later called that the most alarming red flag of this ordeal. Dealership executives of Charlotte's caliber simply never canceled. She slumped heavily into the expensive leather chair behind her desk. Staring out her massive window at the city, she remembered her working-class father. He built their first humble dealership in a cheap strip mall, armed with 12 loyal mechanics and a handshake. He once gave her some advice back, when she was still humble enough to actually listen. The most expensive mistake you can make is paying an expert to be wrong with absolute confidence. Years of massive dealership profits made her completely forget that truth until today. Maya Collins had been Charlotte's loyal right hand for 3 solid years. Figuring out inside 3 short months exactly which corporate battles to fight and which to just let go. Only 28 years old, with a mind built like a brilliant steel trap. She had a trait that was incredibly rare in that wealthy corporate bubble. She spoke the brutal truth even to power because she figured it out long ago. That the long-term payoff of raw honesty always beat the quick sting of upsetting the boss. At 4:30 sharp, Maya knocked on the heavy office door. She walked straight in, silently sliding a small, folded scrap of paper onto the expensive desk. Charlotte stared at the paper, then looked up at Maya. She demanded to know what it was. A name, Maya answered, and a location. The note read Isaac Hayes, Hayes Garage, Oak Creek Road on the west side. You and I know exactly how the wealthy treat the working class. She grabbed it like dirty trash. Maya calmly explained the facts. Isaac Hayes was 39 years old. A humble single dad who'd been raising his little girl since she was 9 months old. His late grandfather left him that dusty garage. Just a gritty two-bay setup in a forgotten neighborhood the polished luxury car world wouldn't ever look at. No flashy website, not a single trace of a digital footprint anywhere. Zero fancy corporate credentials and definitely no glossy magazine features. No elite auto network that Charlotte's dealership snobs could ever track down. But what he did possess, and Maya spent 2 grueling days proving this through underground mechanic whispers, was special. An incredible automotive career cut tragically short, and a legendary reputation passed solely by word of mouth. And in her experience, that meant everything. A reputation built on raw, real-world skill, not million-dollar marketing, that is real trust. Let's go back 3 months. A wealthy Dallas collector brought Isaac a Bugatti Chiron. The certified factory experts in California refused to touch it. Those dealership experts claimed the car's drivetrain was ruined by a flood. They insisted fixing it was impossible. They quoted him $400,000 just for parts. Plus massive labor fees. The fancy dealership told him to scrap it. Isaac took the impossible job. 11 days later, that Bugatti roared to life. The collector paid $6,200. He offered 10 times that to bring Isaac to Dallas, throwing in a free garage. The mechanic turned it down without a single second thought. Charlotte looked up from the printed report. Her expression stayed cold, but the silence grew heavier. Maya had learned to read her after 3 years of working together. "I am not taking Elliot Graves's car to some garage on Oak Creek Road," she snapped. Maya quietly slid a second file across the desk. A heavily blacked-out employment file. Maya got it from an insider who owed her a massive favor. It showed this mechanic was a former senior transmission engineer for AMG in Stuttgart, Germany. 11 dedicated years on the job. He was the main mind behind that legendary AMG transmission powering the GT Black Series. Countless hidden corporate awards for revolutionary diagnostics and fixing impossible root problems. Then a sudden, completely quiet resignation. The reason was listed as personal issues. Charlotte read it twice. She set the file down. The mechanic's hidden past sat right there on her clean corporate desk. The clock showed 4:41. She had only 8 days left. She grabbed the phone and shoved it toward Maya in complete silence. Maya was already dialing. Isaac answered on the 3rd ring, simply stating his shop's name. When Maya explained exactly who they were and why they called, the silence stretched so long that Charlotte thought the mechanic had simply walked away. Then he said, "Bring it tomorrow morning, early," and that was it. Now picture this with me. The gritty garage sat behind a rusty chain-link fence, right where the neat sidewalks ended and woods began. The old sign hanging over the main shop doors was faded. Green once, but decades of hard work had turned it to a ghost. You would only spot it if you knew the secret. Charlotte pulled up at 7:15 in the morning. She stepped onto the gravel in an expensive suit and heels, completely out of place, finding the gate wide open. A beat-up old Ford truck from another era rested on one of the lifts, its oily undercarriage exposed and getting fixed. The second lift sat completely empty, just waiting. You and I know this smell. Engine oil, cheap solvent, and that gritty, working-class honesty. It was the scent of decades of hard labor, a space that never cared about looking pretty for wealthy corporate clients. The real problem solver was on his back under the Ford. He ignored her luxury rental pulling up. He didn't even bother to greet her. She stood perfectly still next to her expensive car. Then she marched to the entrance, calling his name with the same corporate authority she used in high-end boardrooms. Wheels rolled across the concrete. The mechanic slid out from the shadows, grease contrasting against corporate wool. She walked into the dusty garage, noting his towering frame. He had that quiet, rugged strength born from 20 years of turning wrenches without ever thinking twice about it. Thick grease smeared his left forearm and stained his faded collar. He sized up the wealthy stranger like he was checking the morning weather. Just sorting facts, no drama, and absolutely zero fear of her money. Sitting quietly on a small wooden chair near the garage door. His 7-year-old daughter wore a school uniform, tightly clutching a Warren's stuffed rabbit by its ear, holding it with the fierce authority only a working-class kid really has. The girl watched the wealthy visitor with pure, unblinking curiosity, before calmly turning back to the notebook she was sketching in. Listen to this. She pitched the impossible problem exactly as she practiced on the drive. A broken Aston Martin, 5 useless dealership quotes, and only 6 days left to fix it. She threw around technical jargon on purpose, testing the mechanic, the way corporate suits always do to see if a blue-collar guy actually knows his trade. Isaac just listened with his calloused hands folded, and his dark eyes locked on the empty wall right behind her shoulder. When her rehearsed pitch ended, the mechanic remained dead silent. Finally, he muttered, "Where is the car?" 20 minutes later, the flatbed arrived. When the high-end ride rolled off, Isaac circled it 3 times, hands locked behind his back, never touching a thing. Charlotte watched the mechanic, finding his quiet restraint completely frustrating. She was used to fancy, certified experts who grabbed expensive tools immediately. People who needed physical contact just to start guessing. But this hands-on master did not need to touch a thing. Here is where things get interesting. He studied the machine, then asked 3 simple questions. First, was this high-end car detailed before those fancy experts looked at it? Charlotte said yes, she wanted her expensive car looking good. He just nodded. Second, who was actually driving when the gearbox died and for exactly how long? She admitted she was driving with her boss shotgun, and the gearbox failed 12 minutes into the trip. His final question, did anyone swap the fluids in the 60 days before the breakdown? She pulled up the official, high-priced service history on her screen. A transmission fluid service happened 6 weeks ago during a routine checkup at the fancy dealership. The experienced mechanic absorbed the information without flinching. Charlotte broke the silence. 5 top certified technicians already inspected this car. Every dealership claimed the gearbox was trash and needed a complete replacement. So, do you agree with those expensive specialists? He finally looked directly at her, for the first time since the truck arrived. His eyes were steady, carrying the quiet confidence of a craftsman who stopped trying to prove himself to snobs a long time ago. A true problem solver who did not need to fake confidence because his experience spoke for itself. "I haven't even opened the hood yet," he replied calmly. "And I don't care to agree with certified suits who never actually looked inside, either." Charlotte stood there, speechless, as young Nora wandered over and stopped right by the car's rear fender, looking up at the sleek silver hood with that same quiet, intense focus her father always had. "This is a really beautiful car," the little girl whispered to the quiet garage. "Dad always says pretty cars shouldn't die young." Charlotte was stunned. That 7-year-old child just spoke more truth than 3 weeks of arguing with high-end dealership experts. The quiet mechanic laid down his terms, 0 negotiation. He would take the Aston Martin, he needed 7 days. Charlotte was strictly banned from the workshop during the repair. No endless theoretical questions until he was ready to talk. If the wealthy executive wanted to stay during shop hours, she was welcome to sit outside. He pointed toward the worn wooden chair Nora just left. Charlotte stared at it. It was battered, rebuilt by working hands that valued fixing things rather than replacing them. She looked back at the self-taught mechanic. "What's your rate?" "We will talk money once I uncover the real problem." Grabbing a dirty grease rag, he turned back to the old truck on the lift. Just like that, the conversation was over. Picture this. The corporate executive stood in the gravel, suddenly stripped of all her control. She had not sat outside a dusty garage on a wooden chair, trapped on someone else's timeline, since her teenage years working summer afternoons, waiting for her father to clock out so they could finally drive home. Now she was doing exactly that for 7 days. She had no corporate playbook for this. None of her elite corporate credentials prepared her for this. She spent decades making sure the rest of the world waited on her. Day 1. The quiet problem solver stripped the luxury car's access panels and undercarriage without even glancing her way. She pulled up at 7 in the quay morning, parking herself in that beat-up chair outside the bay with a coffee she grabbed at a dingy gas station 2 miles out, simply because there was 0 fancy espresso between her upscale hotel and this rustic garage. Nothing but basic, working-class fuel out here. Nora walked in at 8:15, backpack strapped on, a toy rabbit under her arm. She quietly dropped a second paper coffee cup right beside the wealthy executive's chair. Then she marched inside to kiss the master mechanic goodbye. Charlotte stared at the paper cup, feeling completely humbled, before finally taking a sip. Day 2, she actually started to listen, not to anything she could easily understand. The quiet craftsman worked in heavy silence. Whenever he spoke, it was broken fragments. Low, practical repair terms muttered straight into the open Aston Martin engine bay. But twice that afternoon, she heard this small-town mechanic switch to fluent German. Not casual tourist German, but the sharp, intense, precise language of a true master decoding impossible automotive math. As if this complex transmission defect could only be untangled in its native language. Pacing the gravel lot, she called her assistant to see if their firm retained anyone who could translate highly advanced German automotive engineering jargon. Maya promised she would track an expert down. Now step into day 3. At 2:30, the single dad walked to the bay door, waiting silently until Charlotte finally looked up from the corporate contracts on her screen. He simply said, none of them were completely wrong. He paused. None of them were completely right either. He slipped back into the shadows before she could demand any answers. You and I know that feeling. That cryptic clue haunted the executive all afternoon, completely unsolved. It was no simple comfort, and it was no death sentence. You and I see the real picture, but that suit lacked the hands-on experience to understand it yet. On day 4, the Grease Monkey's kid sat right next to the high-flying boss and asked a question. With the kind of raw honesty you only get from kids and old-timers, she asked her if she had kids. The corporate suit said no. The girl took that in with the quiet curiosity kids have for things that actually interest them. My dad says folks without kids worry way more, the girl shrugged. Because there is nobody else to think about but yourself. The dealership executive slowly lowered her phone, just staring at the kid. But the girl was already busy sketching a cartoon horse wearing a ridiculously fancy top hat. The suit stayed silent, completely unsure if that raw, real-world truth even deserved an answer. And maybe because deep down she knew it was true. Dead right, in a way her textbook business degree had never prepared her for. Then came day 5. An investigator sent over a leaked log of a traced phone call, the kind big corporate dealerships hate to admit exists. Our back-alley mechanic had dialed a number in Germany late at night. It was a direct line to an old AMG transmission specialist who once shared a shop floor with him. Back when our self-taught wizard was actually working in the big leagues. That phone call lasted 41 minutes. The translated logs showed our mechanic asking the foreign expert to double-check one single, hidden software code from a high-end gearbox batch built during a tight 3-month production window. The German specialist confirmed his theory. The master mechanic simply muttered, "That is it," then hung up. The stunned executive read the report 3 times, completely speechless and sending no reply. You and I know that stunned silence. She just sat there, letting the true genius sink in. Knowing that pure diagnostic magic was happening right through the wall of that greasy garage. She still didn't understand his brilliance, but she refused to walk away. On day 6, she pulled up to the worn-out shop and saw a messy note left on the gate. Do not come today. So the executive sat parked in her cheap rental car on Oak Creek Road for over an hour and a half, watching 2 stray birds fight over a rusty barbed fence with growing aggression. Realizing she simply could not walk away from a masterclass in real problem-solving. She waited 40 more minutes. Back at her luxury hotel, the executive sat on the bed in her expensive suit, ignoring an urgent call from head office that rang through to voicemail at 6:15 p.m. She finally called them back at 7 and promised them the luxury car would be ready, forcing the rock-solid, fake confidence she had spent 15 years building in high-level management. But she had no idea. For once, this corporate outsider was putting her faith in hands-on experience instead of spreadsheets and data. And she had absolutely no fancy corporate buzzwords for that feeling. Just the quiet realization that it felt completely new, but she refused to back down. Day 7. She showed up at 5:45 a.m., waiting in a cheap plastic chair in the pitch dark. A single dying street lamp on Oak Creek Road cast a dim light over the gravel driveway. when the exhausted mechanic finally opened the shop door at 6. The master problem solver didn't even look surprised to see her. He looked at the executive in the cold morning light, thought it over, and muttered, "Come inside." The impossible DB11 hung on the lift, its mechanical guts completely exposed. The Aston's transmission casing was split wide open, a level of precision usually reserved for textbook manufacturer manuals. The complex inner workings of the gearbox glowed. Two simple work lights lit up the metal with the clinical precision of a surgical suite. She studied the clutch assemblies, the detailed valve body, and the deep gears. Those complex hydraulic channels sat exposed with absolute clarity, looking a bit less like a ruined luxury part and more like a stubborn machine finally forced to yield its secrets. The quiet mechanic stood by the car, speaking without even making eye contact. He possessed the quiet confidence of a real problem solver who talks to engines, not audiences. This supposedly ruined transmission, he muttered, was completely intact. Every single internal component was entirely flawless. The clutch pack only showed normal wear for its mileage, nothing more at all. The torque converter worked exactly as designed. The entire hydraulic circuit had zero damage and zero contamination. There was no trace of the thermal stress that the dealership report blamed for the failure. Charlotte just stood there, speechless. She listened with that heavy silence you feel when someone is slowly, carefully, demolishing the expensive expert diagnosis you spent 3 long weeks trusting and paying for. So, what actually happened? Isaac continued. It was a failed oil pressure sensor, a 73mm piece of plastic deep in the valve body housing. This tiny sensor failed in an incredibly rare, unheard-of way. Instead of simply going dead, it screamed a continuous false signal, warning of a catastrophic pressure drop across the system. The Aston's computer caught that warning and reacted exactly as the factory engineers programmed it to. It triggered a complete full system protective lockout. It bricked the transmission in fail-safe mode to prevent what it assumed was a mechanical explosion. The expensive gearbox never failed. It was simply ordered to shut down by a panicked computer module screaming a lie. The reason those certified experts missed this, he explained, was not about lacking tools. They simply lacked real deep-level experience. Any DB11 built during one specific 3-month window that year, just 47 cars in total. Let's look at why. They had unique firmware that handled pressure glitches differently than any other car in that line. On standard factory firmware builds, a broken sensor merely triggered a warning light and a simple limp home mode. But this rare version triggered a lockout, throwing 0 fault codes that standard dealer scanners would ever flag. Every fancy diagnostic tool plugged into the car saw the lockout. The experts blindly assumed it was a catastrophic hardware failure, and lazily concluded what it looked like, a completely destroyed transmission. Not one of those 5 specialists dug deeper for the root cause, because the paperwork looked so absolute. It seemed entirely self-explanatory. But real knowledge of this rare firmware only existed in one private document passed around at a closed-door technical seminar in Frankfurt, seen by a tiny handful of engineers from AMG and Aston Martin's development partners. And guess what? Isaac was in that exact room. He had buried that obscure mechanical detail deep in his memory, waiting for a moment where real-world problem-solving mattered. 11 days ago, pacing around this supposedly doomed supercar, our hands-on problem solver finally unlocked that hidden mental file. The actual replacement sensor cost just $340. Installing it and recalibrating the engine computer demanded a highly specific, unwritten procedure. Isaac tackled the complex job alone over 2 late nights, while Charlotte paced her hotel room, dreading Thursday's deadline. The supposedly impossible fix took him only 4 hours. At 2 in the morning, he test drove the Aston Martin down Oak Creek Road, his sleeping daughter riding along in the back. His experience told him to be absolutely sure the fix worked before saying a word. "What is the total damage?" Charlotte asked him. Her voice came out much smaller and shakier than she intended. Like this dusty, humble workshop had swallowed her corporate confidence. $840. Isaac replied calmly. That covers the sensor, fresh fluid, and the computer recalibration. He showed clear proof for every step. Charlotte didn't react the way she expected to. Immediate relief just did not wash over her. Instead, she felt a heavy, slow realization of how those certified experts almost drained $271,000 for absolutely nothing. It was not because she was foolish or naive. Here is where you and I see the real tragedy. She trusted flashy corporate credentials over actual diagnostic ability. She kept asking those fancy dealership mechanics what was wrong inside the transmission. The real question those certified experts missed was what was actually wrong with the vehicle. Our real-world problem solver asked that exact question before laying a finger on a single part. Looking away from her supercar, she studied the humble workshop wall for the first time, and that is when she spotted the old photograph. It showed a younger Isaac, maybe 28, wearing elite Navy AMG engineering coveralls, standing proud inside a workshop. The space looked halfway between a high-tech lab and a temple of mechanical engineering. Beside him stood a beautiful woman, resting her head gently on his shoulder with a radiant smile. A pure, effortless smile that looked as though it belonged on her face forever. And tucked securely in his arms was a tiny baby brand new to the world. Scrawled in bold black marker across the bottom corner, Nora, Day 1. Charlotte stared at this sudden proof of his elite background. Then she faced him. He was slowly wiping grease off his hands with that same calm, unhurried, rhythmic motion she had watched this seasoned problem solver use all week. He kept his eyes down, needing no look at her face to know the wealthy owner had finally cracked his secret. Stunned, she sank slowly into his daughter's tiny chair near the heavy tool bay. Then she quietly asked a question she never expected to voice out loud. Why walk away from Stuttgart? He calmly folded his rag, setting it on the workbench. The workshop fell totally silent. For a moment, she assumed he would ignore her entirely. Finally, he spoke. My wife passed away when Nora was 9 months old. Aneurysm. No warning, just happened out of nowhere. He paused. I couldn't stay in corporate Germany and be a real father at the same time. My grandfather left me this small shop, so I moved back home. He gestured toward the dusty service bays, his movement neither embarrassed nor overly proud. Just an honest gesture from a man stating a simple, undeniable truth of his life. I chose Nora. Charlotte softly asked if he ever regretted walking away. You and I know that real experience brings absolute honesty. He considered her question with the same intensity he brought to fixing shattered engines. Every single day, he replied, and not once. Charlotte let that quiet, battle-tested answer sink in. It sounded like a textbook contradiction until actual reality clicked into place. Until you and I realize that both sides are absolutely true and the only wrong move would be choosing one over the other. Then the corporate executive laid out her high-end offer, completely unfiltered. The role of Chief Technical Officer at Voss Prestige Motors. Complete authority over their service and elite engineering departments. She named a massive salary, knowing corporate money could easily insult a self-taught, working-class genius. Massive equity, a high-tech facility, and a hand-picked team of certified experts. Unlocked access to elite resources and direct manufacturer blueprints. Industry-wide connections a local garage could never offer, providing the perfect platform to let his seasoned hands tackle complex mechanical problems worthy of his deep genius. The quiet, experienced mechanic just listened to it all. He let that textbook corporate pitch hang in the quiet air until she felt its heavy weight. Then he simply shook his head once, no drama, no apologies needed. Nora's school is 3 blocks down, he said. I bring her lunch every Tuesday. The teacher lets me eat with the class because my daughter asked, and they agreed. He looked at the wealthy executive. No corporate salary replaces that. Charlotte realized she could not argue with this, highly unusual for the corporate boss. She usually challenged everything. Instead, she simply asked, "Then what can I do for you?" And she meant it as a completely real, genuine question. Not some polished business negotiation, no empty corporate politeness. Think about it. She just watched a self-taught mechanic outperform her entire team of certified experts. And she honestly wanted to know how to repay such pure, undeniable skill. Isaac weighed the question with the quiet patience of a seasoned mechanic. If your certified dealerships face an impossible luxury car mystery, he said, you know where to find me. That's enough, Charlotte slowly nodded. She placed her glossy corporate card right next to his grease-stained shop rag. Just in case you ever change your mind, she murmured. She left it there, knowing that expecting this hands-on master to sell out was foolish, and she knew he never would. Little Nora ran in from school, while the corporate boss still lingered in the garage. The girl dropped her bag with the total confidence of a kid who had claimed this grease-stained workshop for years. She walked right up to the pricey DB11 and pressed both hands on the hood. She just stood there, tilting her head in the quiet, as if listening for a mechanical heartbeat only true experience could hear. Then she looked up at her father. "Dad, is the engine fixed?" Isaac smiled. "It's fixed." Nora nodded with the absolute faith of a kid who knows her dad is a master, grabbed her bag, and went to find her pet. Charlotte finally drove away from that dusty, independent garage. As she hit the highway and that unassuming workshop vanished from her rearview mirror, she realized this impossible fix proved something no corporate textbook could ever explain. It wasn't just about reviving a ruined luxury transmission. You and I know it was the masterclass of how he actually solved it. 7 days in a humble garage, watching a true master prove that while knowledge makes experts, real-world experience solves the impossible. Yet somehow she stayed. She stayed because this quiet mechanic had a different kind of gravity. No slick sales pitch, just a refusal to sugarcoat the hard truth. Without speaking, this self-taught master made it clear that the impossible job was already done. We rarely see high society folks trust raw, uncertified capability over a flashy brand name. Then Elliot Graves made his grand entrance. Sharp on time that Friday, bringing his usual cold, demanding corporate intensity with him. He thrashed the Aston Martin DB11 for 22 minutes down the test route, right along the waterfront stretch, where that expensive transmission choked 3 weeks back, combined with a punishing return loop straight up a steep, unforgiving hill. A path chosen specifically to push the gearbox right where it previously melted down. The machine sliced through every single gear without a single hiccup. The motor pulled clean and hard, screaming all the way to redline. Inside the cabin, everything was dead silent, exactly as the factory intended. Graves parked outside the Voss building, sitting in silence after killing the ignition. Finally, he stepped out and tossed Charlotte the heavy key. "Who actually worked on this?" he asked. "A mechanic I trust," she said. "From your fancy network?" "No." Graves flipped the expensive key in his hand once, a slow, calculated movement. The quiet action of a powerful man realizing something far beyond the car. He had spent 60 years reading executives, and he was dissecting Charlotte right now. And he spotted a look on her face he had never seen before. Not her polished corporate mask, but something raw underneath, a total shift in perspective. It was the quiet weight of a hard, practical lesson learned on the ground. The old executive had enough mileage to recognize true problem solvers. This is where we learn that overcoming a real, impossible challenge changes you forever. He had witnessed that same spark in elite boardrooms and grease-stained garages alike. He bypassed the story entirely, simply asking, "What is the bill?" Charlotte stared. $840. Graves fell silent for a moment. He did not look surprised at all. He had enough road on him to know the overpriced dealership and the real fix rarely live on the same street. "The real experts," he muttered, "are never where the wealthy think to look." He offered his hand, and they finally shook on it. He promised he would call her next week to finalize that massive corporate partnership renewal. And his voice held a quiet, steady kind of respect, as if the deal was sealed before he ever turned the key. Later that night, Charlotte drove west off the clock in the cheap rental car she had been using. She had been driving it for weeks, totally forgetting it was not her luxury ride. She turned onto Oak Creek Road right as the streetlights flickered to amber. That warm evening glow that makes even weathered, working-class neighborhoods look cinematic. The heavy gate of the small garage was already padlocked for the night. But from the dark road she saw a warm yellow light shining from the side window of his modest home. Through the glass, 2 dark figures sat quietly, one large, one small, sitting close together at a simple, worn-out kitchen table. The young child was clearly doing almost all of the talking, while the quiet problem solver simply listened, giving his full, undivided attention. You know how a real problem solver listens? They are fully present, because hands-on experience has taught them what actually matters. Charlotte did not even slow down. Heading straight back the way she came, she left her high-tech car's radio completely silent. With sharp corporate logic and zero emotion, she analyzed exactly what this wild week had actually proved. It was not just about Isaac, though she would surely think about that quiet mechanic in the months ahead. We all remember those rare moments that fix something deep down inside us. She thought about her habit, born from years of relying on useless certifications, of rushing to make decisions before all the facts were in, of blindly trusting massive dealerships just because they had expensive certifications and shiny showrooms, and treating those flashy, book-smart credentials as a substitute for real, hands-on problem-solving, mistaking the polished confidence of certified experts for real, battle-tested mechanical mastery. Two entirely different worlds she always knew weren't the same, yet somehow she forgot. Without even realizing it, she had started treating them as the same. She almost threw away $250,000, replacing a transmission that a cheap $340 sensor had falsely blamed. Instead, she got schooled by a quiet problem solver, turning wrenches in a tiny garage, hidden down a dirt road her wealthy corporate colleagues would never even look for. An unsung veteran who walked into a room in Frankfurt years ago, keeping his deep experience hidden until the exact moment it became the only thing that mattered, and who had easily turned down every single dollar she offered because those Tuesday lunches with his daughter were priceless, not something any rich executive's massive bank account could ever buy. She saved the quiet master's number as a brand new contact, Isaac Hayes, Hayes Garage, Oak Creek Road. Right below his phone number, she added 4 simple words. Do not call him late. Then she headed back to her quiet hotel and ordered dinner without staring at stressful corporate documents for the first time in weeks. We both know that feeling. She finally ate in the deep silence she had desperately missed.